All right, so what is the blue box as it relates to OS X Panther? What is that guy? Go ahead. Okay, it was a virtual machine which emulated OS 9, so you could run your own your old application. So Blue Box was the actual program that ran OS 9 within OS X. And the reason we needed it is because none of your software that you owned for OS 9 for the Mac ran in OS X natively. There was a time period in there where we had to wait for things to get updated and those programs to get ported over to OS X so they would become native applications. Make sense? All right, so that's what the blue box was. All right, so last time we were talking about the versions of OS X that came out. So we had OS X 10.1 Panther. What were some of the other cats? Okay, we had Lion, Mountain Lion. Oh, Snow Leopard came before that. You had Leopard, you had Snow Leopard. Mr. Quiz.
Oh, data class started 2 minutes ago. How can you have a quiz in 2 minutes?
Class starts at 10:05.
Does it? Oh.
Yep. So Leopard, Snow Leopard, Lion, Mountain Lion. Mavericks. Well, that's not out yet. We'll say Mavericks is the newest. What came before some of these? So we had Panther. There was Tiger. What one are we on right now? 10.9. So Mavericks, this is 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. We already have 1, which was Panther. So we're missing 3 of them in here. So Puma, Kodiak was the original, so the Cheetah never was a release. Puma, Jaguar, Tiger. Well, actually, it looks like the first one was Puma. Panther was actually 10.3. Tiger, Leopard, Lion. So Puma, Jaguar, Panther, Tiger, Leopard, Snow Leopard, Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks. Those are the ones that are out. Ten, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're missing one. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Panther goes right here, right? Okay, so all of these are just the cats. And they ran out of cats. I think I told you the joke when they announced Mavericks. They were joking around, maybe calling it Sea Lion. And they showed like a sea lion bouncing a little beach ball. That was actually Apple at their announcement thing. All right, so all of these are updates to Mac OS X, which was based on Unix. So OS X was actually based on, so we should update that. That's Puma. OS X was actually based on OpenBSD, which is a Unix-based operating system. Okay, What was the big advantage we got from, well, Apple got from moving to a Unix-based system from OS 9? Which OS 9 was a remnant of the operating system that they created based off of the Xerox Star, the original Mac operating system with mouse and keyboard. I think we used the example last time, OS 9 when it crashed, or OS 8, OS 7, pick it. You'd come in and everything looked normal. Even the mouse kept moving with the machine. You'd see the clock. It was like 2:13 a.m. and it's like 9 in the morning or something. So time of death is when they. You had to do a hard reboot to get the thing back up. So there were some stability issues, and certainly there was multitasking weaknesses, and we're going to talk about different multitasking models in here. But they use something called preemptive multitasking, which when you put an application in the background, it basically died. See, I love looking out there and seeing the number of people who are looking down at their laptop screens kind of laughing. You just know they're looking at Facebook or YouTube or something like that. Just completely stupid. It's like, why even pay for college? Isn't it like expensive to go here? Like, what is it per year? Tuition. 26 grand a year, that's just tuition?
Yeah.
So you just come into class and sit there and surf YouTube and Facebook? This is dumb. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, being dumb in class, that's right. Okay, so these are our operating systems. They're all based on Unix. If we're going back to the history of this, so this is back here to Steve Jobs, started off partners with Bill Gates, created a partnership with Xerox, got fired from Apple, right? After he hired the CEO from Pepsi. What was the famous quote? You want to change the world, you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life. So a guy came in, took over as CEO of Apple, convinced the board to fire Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs leaves. Well, doesn't leave, is fired. Goes and buys Pixar. Creates another company called Next Computers. Comes back to Apple as the iCEO. That's what his well, he came back as the interim CEO, and then once he started releasing all these products that had the letter I in front of them, they renamed him to the iCEO and put him as the official CEO of the company. Now, but what's interesting is the connection here with OS X. There was some controversy, well, I say controversy, but some question as whether or not the X represented 10, which is the next, iterative number for their operating system, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or did the X stand for the X in Unix? Because, as we've mentioned, Mac OS X is based on a Unix-based operating system, OpenBSD, a fresh new operating system, which is why all your software stopped working, because it wasn't made for the same operating system. Now, Mac OS X was based here. Actually, we'll do that in the previous slide. When Mac OS X came out, it was like that. Was based on OpenBSD and the Next operating system. And Next was the company that Steve Jobs had founded while he was away from Apple. Now, what's interesting is historically, most people think that Apple today was the Apple that Steve Jobs saved, but was the Apple before that. Realistically, and we'll actually show this through an example. Well, here, we'll open up Xcode. This is our app from the last hackathon. Here, I'll show the app real quick. It was a cool app. Who all was at that? Were any of you guys at that hackathon? The Battle Hack? Yeah, most of it was students who had just graduated computer science. We wrote an app called Meal Ticket. And the idea was marrying crowdfunding to child sponsorship. So you know how there's like places that you can spend $40 a month and sponsor a child from a third world country or something like that. Well, you know, we decided, hey, well, maybe there's a lot of people who can't afford $40 a month, but they might want to participate in child sponsorship, so maybe they want to spend $1 a month. And then we just need to find 40 people who are each willing to do $1 a month to fully sponsor a child. You know, so you could, you'd select the birth date of the kid. Here, let's just give them I don't have the camera turned on here. Just obviously I'm on a whatever. You say where they're from. This is the particular countries this one company we were used. And then you take a picture of them. But the camera doesn't work on here, I don't believe. Yeah, it crashes. But it actually was pretty neat. We had a way to browse it. And here's me. Fiji was the name of this person. But during our presentation, this is one of the MCs for the event from PayPal. So, Justin has been a great asset at the Battle Hack 2014 Hackathon. Unfortunately, he is still in need. He's 32% sponsored at this point. So that was that. I thought that would be a fun little thing to look at real quick. But the reason I came in here, and here we'll just pick a random chunk of code here. I'm sure we'll find something real quick that will, here, NS array. So there's some code that we wrote. NS stands for next step. So programmatic interface that the Apple today, and this is code using the latest, greatest version of the iPhone OS, which is based on OS X. The Apple of today is actually under the hood Next computers with a nice Apple logo on it. Okay, so even at the programming level, we're using stuff that is left over from Next computers. Okay, so kind of an interesting piece of information that what we think of as Apple is actually a company that Steve Jobs created when he was away from Apple. Because Apple really went in a pretty poor direction while Steve Jobs was gone. We talked a little bit about that last time, mentioning kind of the word proprietary. Usually proprietary kind of gives off a feeling of being negative. Proprietariness is bad, right? Well, proprietariness actually works really well for Apple. In fact, when they tried to go less proprietary, the company almost failed. They tried to allow places to make Mac or Apple clone computers, Mac PowerPC clone computers. So now you weren't forced to buy hardware from Apple. You could buy hardware from whoever, and Apple would make their software, for that. Well, with that, you give up a whole lot of stuff. When you talk to Apple fanboys or iPhone fanboys, one of the things that they brag about is everything just works, right? And the reality is how many of you are Apple users or iPhone users for that route? Would you say it's pretty much a true statement that everything just works? It is a true statement with Apple. So it's not a lie, but why does it just work? Well, because Apple controls both sides of the coin. They make their hardware, they make their software, and their software works really, really well for their hardware. They're not having to make their software work for 1,000 different computers, only their crap. And when they come up with new software and they decide, you know what, we don't want to make this work for some of our older crap, they just say this won't work for our older crap, right? So for those of you who have an older iPhone, you might not be able to run the latest, greatest iOS software. They might say, oh, we're not going to support that. So if you have an iPhone 3GS, for example, a little bit older model iPhone, it was the faster 3G model. I think the latest software you can run on that is iOS 6, maybe? I think that's true. And they're just getting ready to release iOS 8. That's two major revisions. That's major. That's a major step back. I think iOS 7 only runs on an iPhone 4 and newer, and I think iOS 8 might even drop iPhone 4. I think it's the 4S and newer for iOS 8. Don't quote me on that, but something along those lines. Because Apple controls both sides of the coin, when they don't think they can deliver the right user interface, they can just say, hey, we're not going to support that old piece of crap. Come and give us more of your money. Right? It's like, well, I can't get the latest software on my 4S, so I guess I'll have to re-up my contract with whoever your cell phone provider is and get this year's free phone or this year's $99 phone. So you're going to be able to get an iPhone 5 for free probably in 3 weeks. Right now, the free one's the 4S. But when they release the 6, then the 5S becomes their $100 one, and everything else before that's just the crap. But so Apple kind of controls their own community. When they want more money from you, they just shake the tree. And then money just comes spilling out of people's pockets, right? How many of you have been to the Apple retail store? It's like always crowded, right? It's like hard to buy stuff in there.
And I've been to the one in Japan too.
Did they speak English?
Yeah, they did. They did some of them.
Some of them?
Yeah.
How big was it? Because that's actually a newer store.
Yeah, it's pretty, but it's right in the Shibuya square. It's like the busiest intersection.
Shibuya Square?
Yeah.
That sounds made up.
No, it's not.
Is that the Tokyo area?
Yeah. Shibuya-ku or something.
It's isn't it like 3 floors tall? Or is it 2?
I think it's on. I don't think it's 2. It got to be 2 floors then because it was kind of tall, but not tall like the rest of the sky.
Right, but I thought it has the glass elevator thing in there that takes you up.
Yeah.
So they modeled it after
because it was so crowded and packed in there. It was crazy.
I know. They need to do like water power, and people can kind of just step up. They have one of those big wheels. So think escalator, but instead of it being a stairway, you just kind of stand on it. It's almost like a carousel. Or what are they called? What's the
Ferris wheel?
Ferris wheel? It's like a Ferris wheel, except you're standing.
That would be a problem.
And the person right in front of you farts. And you got nowhere to go. As you step back, you're falling off. Well, I guess you could hope for the person behind you. That would actually probably be a real safety hazard. My Ferris wheel lift program actually seems like it would be very problematic from an insurance perspective. How I'm thinking about it. Even just the slightest slip, the person's gone. Yeah, so I'll make sure I email Apple and tell them no, don't implement the Ferris wheel plan I sent them. But in any case, these stores are always packed. And most people say, oh, well, hey, Apple's expensive, right? So how many of you have Apple laptops or desktops out there? Several of you have your Macs with you, right? How many of you think that Apple is cheap? Nobody. They're expensive, right? I tell when I talk to people about what machine they can get, I always tell technologists, always get a Mac. Not because Mac's necessarily better. It's because it's one machine for the price of 1.7. I think I said it in here before because you can run Windows stuff and you can run Mac stuff all on a single computer. So it's really inexpensive when you think about it from that perspective. But if Grandpa just needs to write Word documents and check his email, well, you know what? You can buy a Ferrari or you can buy a Honda Civic, and they will both get you to work, right? So you might as well buy the Honda Civic and like a house. Then the Ferrari, right? It's kind of that type of trade-off, I guess. But generally speaking, Apple products are expensive products, correct? Because they're not playing to the low-end budget pleaser market. Steve Jobs used to say, we don't know how to make a tablet for $200. When people were complaining the iPad was too expensive. And clearly the iPad has been a huge disappointment, barely sold any. Right? People just throw money at Apple, right? They're making good products. And people who are Apple fans tend to say things just work. And they do. Because Apple is proprietary. They control both sides of the coin. Now, those of you who are, we can go Microsoft fans for the desktop world. Microsoft solving a much more difficult problem. They're writing Windows 8, Windows 7, choose your flavor. They're writing it for a bunch of different computers. So some of you in here probably have Dell computers. Some of you have HP computers. Some of you have Alienware, which is actually Dell now. But, you know, several of you have different machines. How many of you built your own PCs? So this is whatever your last name is, brand computer, right? You pick the case, you pick the motherboard, you know, you have a hodgepodge of stuff. You're using the same parts that Dell uses and things like that, but you chose your own adventure. You picked your RAM, all this other stuff, and it was a cool project, right? And now there's a sense of ownership now that you have this high-powered computer and blah, 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 but it's like, you know, you can't configure this thing. I bought this thing from, you know, some random dude in Japan. You can't even get this system in the United States because it's cooled with, I don't know, ether or something like that. You know, that's a computer that Microsoft couldn't have possibly planned for. You know, this is even working with one of the big companies. This is like, you know, Evan's computer he made in his basement type thing, right? So Microsoft is solving a much more difficult problem writing the software, similar to Google with Android for the smartphone world. You know, those of you who are Android fans, if you're trying to argue that the interface for Android is as polished as the interface for iPhone, you're an idiot. It's not. Google's solving a lot more difficult problem, though. They're writing an interface for a whole bunch of different handsets with different screen sizes and different speeds and different peripherals on them, all sorts of different stuff. When you look at it from that perspective, it's actually shocking how good Android is. I mean, it's not like iPhone's good and Android's crap. It's like iPhone's good and Android's like pretty good, right? I mean, it's actually shocking how good Android is, given the problem they're solving. But for Apple, proprietariness works. Google is the antithesis of that. They want to make their stuff open source for everybody. And that's actually caused their own problems. What problems have been created out of Google's open source nature of the Android operating system? Why has that proven to be not quite as good as it might sound on paper?
Lots of very unpolished stuff, I guess.
Okay.
Apps-wise?
Certainly, the quality of the apps gets questionable because now you have third-party people writing software, and they may decide to make the interface look pretty good on kind of your common Android phones, maybe the Samsung Galaxy line, and anything outside of that, we'll just hope for the best. You know, so you might have some app quality issues with that. What else? Really at the core of the problem. If you go out and buy an Android phone today, what are the chances that it's running the latest, greatest version of Android? Maybe 50-50. I mean, if you bought the phone that came out yesterday, probably. But if you have a phone that was released 2 months ago, chances are it's running a one version older version of Android. Now, what about updating it? When Google releases a new version of Android, does that mean you can just instantly download it for your Android device?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you use Nexus.
If you use the Nexus. Yep. Nexus devices, you can always download it right off the bat because it's actually made by Asus, but that's the device that Google writes the Android operating system for, is the Nexus. So they always get it right away. Well, if you're running the Samsung Galaxy, which we could probably all agree is probably the most popular Android phone, there's 3 or 4 devices that tend to be probably taking up 96% of the Android market. But is it a fair statement to say the Samsung Galaxy line is probably the most popular, or certainly in the top 2, right? If you have a Samsung Galaxy, you don't get the update day one. You'll start getting the update day one moving forward, because Google just implemented something new. But prior to this, it's usually about a 2-week wait when Android releases a brand new version of the operating system before Samsung modifies the operating system enough to work on their devices. So now you're not even getting the real Android version. You're getting a modified version of Android that may have some new bugs introduced into it so that it works on the phone. That becomes problematic in and of itself. Well, now Google has created a new initiative with some of the big Android companies so that they all get, the Android hardware companies, so that they all get a new version of the software on the same day when they release it. This means that Google has created a standard by which all these places have to adhere so that the software will work on their phones day one. And this is a far cry. How many of you have ever had a Samsung smartphone? Samsung smartphone running Android? It's like the Android people don't want to like admit. How many of you had when you got yours? Everything on it it's called Binged. The default search engine was Bing. The default email was Bing. Well, it was Microsoft Hotmail or MSN Mail. Any of you have that when you got the phone? That used to be the big thing that Samsung did in some of the earlier versions of Samsung. I think the Galaxy 2 still did that, where the phone was Binged. So now you're taking an operating system, a phone running an operating system made by Google. How much do you think you have to modify that operating system to have everything be Microsoft-based? And for those of you who run Android, you know that it really pushes you towards the Google world, correct? There's nothing wrong with that. Makes for a more seamless integration. It's probably one of the features of Android. But that would be an example of the level of fragmentation you'd have in the Android world when you have companies that can modify the software to that extent, completely changing the identity of it. And that adds a whole lot of different user experiences in the Android world. So Google is solving the old Microsoft problem where they're writing software for a bunch of different computers. But proprietariness works for Apple. Proprietariness happens to not work for the other guys. So all along, we've always had kind of this fight between the proprietary evil and the non-proprietary evil. You know, Microsoft, their operating system specifically was proprietary, but they made it work on everybody else's hardware. So we'll say that's the non-proprietary version of it. And that worked well for them as well, right? Why do you think that Apple, dropping their proprietary nature, broke their company? I mean, Apple was really close to just shutting its doors when they decided to not rely on just their own hardware, when they started letting other people make Hackintosh compatible hardware. Why did that break the company when it was working for everybody else? Microsoft was writing Windows for Dells and Gateways and HP. Who bought Gateway? Was it HP? Somebody bought Gateway. They used to have the boxes that looked like cows all over the place, and they just disappeared one day. It's like an alien abduction or something. I'm pretty sure it was HP that bought them, but don't quote me on that. I'm about 32% correct. 32% sure, I guess. Why didn't that work for Apple?
Because Apple charged all kinds for theirs, so they weren't selling any of theirs.
Charges all kinds of what?
Money.
Okay. So Apple lost a lot of revenue from their hardware, because Apple computers have always been expensive. Even by today's model, how many of you? So we already took. How many of you are running Mavericks out there on your Mac? The newest operating system. So every single one of you, when Mavericks was released, you pulled your wallet out and you dropped the credit card and said, "I'm going to go buy Mavericks." Right? How much did Mavericks cost you?
It's a free upgrade.
0. How much is the new operating system going to cost?
I don't.
0. How much is iWorks, their version of Microsoft Office? So iWork, Keynote, all those. How much does that cost? Free. Apple's made all their software free. So where's the real money in for Apple? Well, even their software on mobile is free. Yeah, you always get the new operating system. It's free, whatever mobile device you have. They're making their money off the hardware. Now, isn't that funny? This gets back to our story full circle. And remember, I said the most profitable negotiation probably in history when Bill Gates sat in the room with IBM and said, "Oh, we want to license you our software on a per machine basis." And IBM says, "No problem. The real money's in the hardware." And we laughed at that. But with Apple, it's true. The money is in the hardware. Why does that work for Apple but not everybody else? These are the same parts. You rip this laptop open, you're going to find the same Intel i5 processor, i7. I think there's an i7 in this. You know, that you'll find in who else in here is running an i5 or an i7 laptop that's not a Mac? You rip those two computers in half, you'll find the same chip. I could probably yank the chip out of his, put it in mine, and work fine. Same parts. So fine, you know, maybe the exterior case of mine is, you know, a little bit nicer. You know, it's metallic and polished, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's the same crap inside. Chances are screens came off the same assembly line. Actually, this is the Retina. It maybe came off a different one. But, you know, you get the point. They're all using the same parts. You know, so it's not like Apple's getting their stuff from a diamond mine. Everybody else is, you know, patent copper. Okay, maybe the marketing. Put enough, you know, bald people with British accents on commercials, and you get that just equals sales, right? Big money.
And their reputation.
Okay, well, the reputation is, hey, we're expensive. Why does this work for Apple? Microsoft never got into the world of hardware, really. I mean, you could buy a Microsoft keyboard, you could buy a Microsoft mouse, but in terms of, you could never buy a Microsoft computer. Never make computers. And we would have said Microsoft was a very, very, very profitable company, right? Still is. It's not fair to say was. They're making cash. It's not like they're folding or anything. Okay? So we look at it and we say that was one of the most profitable deals in history when Microsoft created the idea of licensing software. IBM says the real money's in hardware because that's where they've made their money. Because it kind of predated the idea of software. Before then, they had, you know, relatively limited user interfaces because their machines they were selling weren't for the typical consumer. They were for highly technical people who don't need a really nice, easy-to-use interface. They just need a functional interface. So Microsoft made their money by licensing easy-to-use software. That doesn't work for Apple. Apple has to have the hardware too. In fact, now Apple's software is free. But we just said that Apple hardware is nothing special in the big scheme of things. In fact, what makes my laptop different than some of these PC laptops out there? The BIOS on this is a little bit newer technology that Apple uses that allows me to install Mac OS X on this machine, but not install it on that machine without some workarounds. There's a project called Hackintosh that sort of kind of lets you do it, but it's got some issues. Part of the issues are driver support, because Apple only has to write drivers for their own crap. And he probably just has a different video card in his laptop than Apple has designed their operating system to work optimally with, or something like that. But in any case, Apple has really created a two-part product. It's hardware married to software as a one complete product. That's what Apple sells. So it sells the combination of the two. They're not making their money off the software directly. They're indirectly making their money off the software because the software is what makes the hardware special. So now they can sell those products and keep selling those products, and when they need to get more money out of you, they just make the last version of a piece of hardware not upgradable to the newest software. So now you have to go and buy the newest hardware. That is keep you on the hook. Most people who are Apple users continue to be Apple users. Makes sense, right? How many of you in here use iPhones? How many of you have purchased at least 2 iPhones before? This is your second or third or fourth. So I had an iPhone. I had an iPhone 3. I had 3G. Well, I had the iPhone 3G. I had the 3GS, the 4, 4S, the 5. This is my 7th iPhone. And next, was it next Tuesday or something? I think next Tuesday is when Apple does their next announcement, when they're going to announce the iPhone 6. And when that comes out, I'll get one of those too. It's just like a money tree. Apple just, give me all you cash. Okay, thanks. they've created a different environment. So what worked for one company did not work for the other. Apple has created a cohesive product that is marrying their hardware with their software. Their software is specially designed to work well with their hardware. And you invert that, you say that's like the Hackintosh example here. With Apple products, if we tried to put OS X Mavericks on one of these PC laptops in here, it's not a clean, easy install, and chances are it's going to be unstable, and there's going to be things that don't work because Apple didn't design it for all that hardware. Okay, so the software is only as good as the hardware it's running on. Those two get married to each other. Okay, now a big move that Apple did was moving from PowerPC to Intel processors. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that if I were to rip this laptop open and rip one of these PCs open, they're going to have the same Intel processors in them, right? That wasn't always the case. Before Macintosh, before Apple moved over to Intel processors, they used a type of processor called the PowerPC. PowerPC was a chip made by IBM. So the last chip IBM made for them was the PowerPc G4 processor. And that was actually kind of an interesting time period with Apple history. This was still during the OS 9 version, so it would probably be inserted somewhere in here. So when I was an undergrad, I had a Apple, I don't remember the speed of it, maybe like 1 gigahertz G4. And I sold it on eBay. And then 2 days later, Apple released their new version of the G4 with dual processors in it. So not a dual core G4, but 2 G4 processors in the machine. And that machine was the same price as the 1 processor G4 was. So I actually sold this thing the day before Apple announced this. And the nice thing with Apple is they never talk about their announcements until they make their announcements. So this dude on eBay paid top dollar for a single processor machine when the very next day he could have bought a dual processor machine for about the same price. So I got the dual processor one. So now I had, a dual processor, 1 gigahertz G4, just sick, crazy machine. Had something in it called AltaBec, which was similar to those of you who have Intel processors that have hyperthreading, where you can do multiple things at once, even though it's technically only a single core. So certain things could be done very, very, very quickly on it. Now, what's interesting about this move, though, is Apple had all these commercials, where you had, 2 heads is better than 1, and, it's the first supercomputer on your desktop. Really interesting, good marketing type commercials. Funny thing is that at the time, so that dual processor G4 shipped with OS 9 on it. This is prior to OS X. And OS 9 did not support multiple processors. A few software applications could take advantage of it, Photoshop being one of them. But even then, it wasn't fully taking advantage of it. So you just got this brand new supercomputer. You can actually call it a supercomputer because it did, over 1 teraflop per second of computational power, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. So you get this thing, and you're running OS 9 on it, you're thinking, oh, this is the fastest thing since sliced bread, blah, blah, blah. Sliced bread's not that fast. This is the coolest thing since sliced bread, but sliced bread's not that cool. So anyways, you get this thing, and it's supposed to be awesome, and nothing really seems to be better. And Apple's laughing their way to the bank. Because how many people just sold their single processor G4s to turn around and buy a dual processor G4 that's no faster than their single processor G4, because one of those processors is just sitting there idle all the time. Just humming away, doing nothing, chilling, vegging out, watching TV, whatever it's doing. Kind of funny, right? Well, then OS X came out, which was a Unix-based operating system, which could take advantage of the second processor, but none of your software worked. So even the software you used to have that can support multiple processors, they didn't work either. Kind of a funny time in Apple's transition. That was a pretty big risk they took when they made that jump from OS 9, which really we needed to move away from that. and they went to a brand new system that wasn't compatible with their old stuff. Have we seen that model more recently in other areas of technology? The Xbox stuff, right? PlayStation stuff. How many of you have a PS4 or an Xbox One? How many of you who have the new ones also had the old one? PS3 or an Xbox 360? Software doesn't work, right? You can't take your Xbox 360 disc and pop it into your Xbox One and play that game. But prior to that, if you had an Xbox 360, you could play your old Xbox games on it, right?
Some.
Yeah,
About
almost
50-50.
all of them.
It wasn't nearly that. There was a bunch of lesser titles that you can. It was only like
lesser titles.
there was
Yeah.
Halo and.
But the discs should work. You're saying that some of them were buggy.
No, straight up didn't work.
Well, yeah, there were some that didn't work.
Yeah,
It's
so
honestly,
they had to go in and change them all.
What was the rationale for that? It was supposed to be backwards compatible. Why would a game not
Certain
work?
Titles, it was only certain titles.
I wonder what it was about them. Was it the disc itself?
I think it was just how they were run.
Well, in any case, they at least advertised it as being backwards compatible, right?
PS3 was for a time, but then the newer versions they came out.
Really? So that must have been as they were moving towards less proprietary Blu-ray technology. Because when PS3 first came out and Xbox 360 first came out, Xbox was based on HD DVD, and PS3 was based on Blu-ray. So you couldn't play a Blu-ray disc in an Xbox 360, correct? Yeah, huh?
Blu-ray player.
An external component that plugged into it, right? They were based on different technologies, and Blu-ray ended up winning that war, right? You can't go out and buy an HD DVD anymore; they're dead. But in any case, there was backwards compatibility-ish there, let's say. But with our newest systems, 0 games work. A couple of games have the ability where if you bought the game for PS3, they give you a free upgrade code to PS4 for $10. You can go to the PS4 version of it, something like that. But you physically need to acquire the game again, whether it's an online, a download or a physical disc, whatever it is. So we've seen this repeated, more than one time, where we make this jump between software. Now, it's easier, I think, in the gaming world. Because in the gaming world, even though some of you go back and play the same game multiple times, the world tends to be at least games that are beatable, that you go and you play the game, and as soon as you finish beating it, it kind of goes on your back burner, or some of you trade it in and use the money towards a new game or something like that. For games that you keep going back to, when they come out with a new version that has upgraded graphics and new storylines, whatever it is, you tend to just buy the new one anyways, right? So it's not as big of a deal. But if you are a PC user or a Mac user and you're used to productivity applications like Microsoft Office, and you go and you buy the latest, greatest operating system from Apple, which you think you're supposed to do, right? OS X comes out, everybody's been bragging about it, you go and get it, and all of a sudden all your software that you require that you need to use on a daily basis, whether you're a student or you're in industry and this is your job, all of a sudden that software doesn't work without the blue box thing. That was a pretty big risk. Apple already had very small market share, relatively speaking, right? So they really risked alienating their entire user base. And they did lose some users over it. Why do you think they didn't fail in that transition? I really think, and again, this is an opinion, but I think it has something to do with the cult nature of Apple. When you go into an Apple store, it feels a little weird in there, doesn't it? You're kind of looking around to find out where the Kool-Aid is. You know what I mean? And this is coming from an Apple user. It's strange. The world of Apple is kind of weird. So I really think they didn't lose as many people as they would have lost otherwise because they had such a cult following. Oh, Apple is all powerful. I'm sure they'll fix this, blah, blah, blah. and then they went and recruited new crazy people. Okay, so interesting dynamic. So we'll come back on Friday and we'll pick up from here.